Resilient by Valerie Bell. Read by Rose Malik. Chapter 2 2050 and the Fearless Future of Faith. It's Monday night, and I'm walking my grandsons through the church parking lot. Rowan, 8, Reese, 6, Merrick, 3, and I hold hands as we move through the car labyrinth until we reach the safety of the sidewalk. They stay close to me without being obviously clingy. They are, after all, boys, but ask in whispers, Lovey, are you going to stay with us for the rest of the night? Every week, my answer is the same. Of course I will. But this night is different. Rowan's little boy hand pulls away from me. Suddenly, he's running ahead with his two younger brothers sprinting in his wake. My heart jumps. I can read this body language. Their feet pound out a pattern on the pavement I recognize. It's anticipation. It's joy. It's rushing to receive. In just a few weeks, they've learned what waits for them inside the church doors. Something wonderful. The greeters know them by name and welcome them with smiles. Hey, buddy, glad you came, Rise. Good to see you, Rowan. What'd you do? Grow a couple of inches this week? Hi, Merrick. Cool shoes you got there, man. It is warm and fun. There is food, of course, because it's a church after all, but there are precious intangibles as well. The walls ring with adult reassurances that life is sweet and God is love, and peanut butter prayers and lisped Bible memory verses echo back in childish voices. My grandkids belong to this tribe of children. Here is safety, wisdom, and a life direction, and more. Here is a unique presence of loving, caring adults. Every week, these kids make friends. Every week, they fall in love with Jesus and His Word just a little bit more. I can see a precious work of God being formed more beautifully in their hearts. One grandson listens to the Bible every night as he falls to sleep. Another says he wants to marry a woman who is a Jesus follower. And then there is one who, when I told him I wanted him to grow up to be a spiritual giant, answered, Yes, I'm going to be God. He's 3. He thinks that's the best spiritual giant he can emulate. Yikes. At least we still have time to work on that theology. But, right or wrong, they are forming, and we have plenty to discuss. This life blessing of belonging that is rooted in spiritual community is what I want for them. Desperately. One day they will look to me for reassurance. You're going to stay with us for the rest of our lives, aren't you, Lovey? And I won't be able to respond, of course I will. When they let go of my hand for the last time, I hope they will joyfully face their tomorrows with confidence, knowing that everything they need in life has been given to them already, and anything beyond is theirs for the asking. I hope they will hear the echo of my voice. Run with power, Rowan. Tap into your spiritual wisdom. Be resilient. Go for it with joy, Reese. The joy of the Lord is your strength. Take it by storm and don't be afraid, Merrick. God is your helper. Be fearless and run right into the center of the storm. Remember, my loves. Remember. Hopefully, they will still have a wonderful church. Inside the walls of that ancient gathering, they will be known by name and smiled on. They will find their familiar tribe, their known God, and His ever more applicable word. And when they face uncertainty, loss, or pain, which they certainly they will know to run to the church, where they will be reminded that life is sweet, that God is love, and that this is where they belong. Consider this. The present is more than the present. It is the foundation for the future. In 2050, these dearly loved grandchildren, along with your children and grandchildren, will be adults. This tribe of size 4s and 6s currently in Sunday schools and kidmin programs today will be the future leaders of the church, the salt in an increasingly secular culture, the people called to love and shine in a world that is becoming more openly hostile toward their beliefs, their place in the world, and their God. Year 2050, by anyone's guess, is going to be tough on believers and the church. If the future of faith is a kid singing Jesus Loves Me today, will that child be determinately resilient and fearlessly ready to face his or her adult world? Will he or she be faithful? Will today's children be strong enough in their adult years to lead the church and influence the culture in which they must live in 2050? Or will they be driven underground and muted? Can discipleship be customized for their future and the distinctive time in which they will be living? Will we have given them the unique discipleship foundation they need to be leaders of that future mid-century church? And will that foundation help them fearlessly engage the culture and influence it? Today's church kids are growing up in both a secular and church culture that are unlike the cultures in which most adults grew up. More importantly, the culture kids are experiencing is unlike the ones that are to come. I fear our assumptions that it will stay the same, our cluelessness in the midst of huge cultural shifts, may lead us to be unresponsive to the needs these shifts present in building strong and relevant spiritual foundations for the years ahead. The Barna Group makes this point as well. In some ways, the church is not preparing young disciples for the world as it is. Cultural discernment is about teaching them not just what to think, but also how to live. We must prepare them for the world as it truly is, not as we wish it to be. I fear we may realize too late that we gave them things that didn't really matter. Things that didn't travel into their adult lives as anything more than spiritual entertainment and moralistic stories, things lacking real spiritual power and proactive purpose. We are living in times of unprecedented change. The entire world is shifting and tilting towards an unknown future. And when it comes to our children, it is as if we are launching a generation of kids to land in 2050 on an unknown and faraway planet. How can we possibly prepare them to survive and thrive in that foreign 2050 place? This we sense. The adults of the future church will need to be disciples, as few modern generations before them have had to be. They will need fearless resilience. None of us knows the future with certainty, but we can look at some growing trends and see how these seismic shifts are impacting today's kids and foreshadowing their futures. Screen discipleship. This first seismic shift. Technology has brought a heightened velocity of secular culture. It points to several troubling emerging issues: a decline in well being, a rise of addictive behavior among adults and adolescents, and an engulfment in secular values. Technology has brought us many advances and changed nearly every area of our lives, from how we learn to how we travel, and how we relate to each other. It has saved us time and increased our productivity, but it has come at a cost that we are just now beginning to understand. As children use mobile technology, scientific research is beginning to tell us that these screens are changing the brain functioning in ways we haven't seen before. After years of screen usage, this huge social experiment, as it were, the brain science data is now mature and substantive enough to report on the effects of kids' early exposure to the screen. Kids' screen usage puts the brain on pause developmentally. Are we okay with this? The average daily screen usage between 0 and 8 years old is 50 minutes. Between 8 and 12 years old is 6 hours. And teenagers? 9 hours. It's as if a media tsunami has engulfed our lives. Should we be concerned about this? A first of its kind study by the Cincinnati Children's Research Group reports it's clear that children who have too much screen time can have deficits in other areas, like language, imagination, and emotions. The years from 3 to 5 represent a formative stage of development. Too much screen time is a setup for atrophy or underdevelopment of these higher order brain networks. The brain just doesn't have to do any work. It will be harder for kids with underdeveloped networks to learn. It's like the lights are on, but nobody's home. Not only is technology compromising our brain formation and occupying large portions of our time, it is suspected of being the primary driver behind the deterioration of our mental health, especially our kids' mental health. Teens whose lives are dominated by mobile technology, playing video games, texting, and using social media, are experiencing a significant and alarming plunge in emotional well being compared to their less media engaged peers. In a study charting well being among American adolescents, measured by self esteem, life satisfaction, and happiness, psychologists discovered a significant decline after 2012. In exploring the underlying causes, researchers observed that the increased use of smartphones by teenagers is likely a contributor to the trend. They found teenagers who spent more time engaged in screen activities, i.e., social media, the internet, texting, and gambling, registered lower levels of psychological well being. On the other hand, teenagers who limited smartphone use and regularly engaged in off screen activities, in person social interactions, sports or exercise, homework, and church activities, had higher psychological well being. The world of sin that was once out there, that world that followers of Christ once practiced separation from, movies, smoking, drinking, drugs, etc., has returned with a vengeance into the palm of our kids' hands. pornography, graphic musical lyrics, X-rated violent movies, extreme materialism, explicit sexting, and a worldview that is the opposite of and opposed to all things Christian. The potential for a kid to become engulfed in an omnipresent secular culture is limitless. And where are mom and dad? You guessed it. They are absorbed with their own screens. The 2018 Nielsen Audience Report found adults are now spending more than 11 hours a day on media. Added up, and adults will spend an average of 11 years of their lives involved with a cell phone. 11 years in which they are not available to their children who are physically present in their lives. There is a word that describes our relationship to the screen. That word is addiction. To summarize, today's kids are becoming screen disciples through secular venues like YouTube, Snapchat, Instagram, and other media messaging. This strong, secular driven culture is ever present in their lives, addictive, and more readily available than mom and dad. It's where they go for advice, what to think, and how to behave. It's where they go for a relationship and identity. Compare screen time with church time, 1.7 times a month for an hour or two, and we have to admit, our kids are screen disciples. Family breakdown. The second seismic shift affecting kids today has been the breakdown in family structure. For many Americans, the intact forever family is a fairy tale from a bygone age. Approximately 50% of American kids will witness the breakup of their parents' marriage. This fragmentation in the family has created a fatherless epidemic with more than 20 million American kids experiencing fatherlessness in the United States today. And what has family breakdown done to the values of a generation of kids? When Gen Z, anyone born after 1996, was polled and asked, "What matters?" they answered differently than millennials or Gen Xers. A plurality of Gen Z said achievement matters, measured by financial success. Only 1/3 of Gen Z said family mattered most, compared to Gen X and millennials, who put family first. Why, we ask? When family is insecure, a generation might look elsewhere for stability in life. The only way they might have a sense of belonging is through accomplishment. The only way they might feel secure is by having enough money. What does this mean? And why do we continue ministering to kids as if nothing has changed? It means the family is no longer the primary influencer. Gen Z are disciples of and primarily influenced by their peers and by the screen. How do we sync that reality with studies that have found parents are the primary influence in spiritual formation? These findings have understandably driven KidMin programs to seek parental engagement as one of their pillars of programming. For more than 70 years, parental involvement has been the core to our ministry. My husband, Steve, and I wrote Faith Shaped Kids to encourage parents to disciple their children, writing that children grow in the soil of their parents' faith. But there is a built in assumption at work that children will have engaged and available parents in their lives. Unfortunately, the breakdown of the American family, including the national epidemic of fatherlessness and single mothering that is pervasive across all economic, social, and spiritual stratum, is the new norm. Are we tone deaf to our surrounding culture and the realities of broken families sitting in our pews and living in our communities? Have we effectively trained and equipped parents to disciple their own children and live up to our expectations of their place as the primary guide in their spiritual formation? If today's children cannot be made disciples by their parents, who can step in? To summarize, the church needs to stand in the gap as the belonging family and primary influencer for a generation of kids whose parents are missing or unable to nurture them spiritually. Church decline. The third seismic shift. Church closures are on the rise. Every week, 100 to 200 churches close. That's 6,000 to 10,000 churches each year. But even more alarming is the answer to the question, are we losing our kids? According to estimates from studies by the Barna Group, the overall dropout rate in the past decade is 59% to 64%. This is a sobering measurement of the effectiveness of the discipleship of our kids. This often cited data has led some to declare things like, we have lost a generation, or the church is dying. To fairly balance this alarming news, we need to look at other studies indicating that of those kids who leave the church in college, nearly two-thirds return and are currently attending church. But how many of this generation are disciples? Barna found that 10% of our kids between 18 and 29 years of age met criteria for being resilient disciples. That's 4 million young people who are living a resilient, engaged faith. There are already around 4 million resilient disciples out there. But what about the others? Are we doing the right things to retain them? What is today's church kids' relationship to the church anyway? Some data shows that church children are attending church only 1.7 times a month. That equals 24 hours in church per year. This is a stark contrast to the number of hours these kids are spending in front of their screens. Kinnaman and Matlock made this conclusion in Faith for Exiles, and we completely agree. The data indicates that an hour or less a week in church, or, more likely, an hour or so every few weeks when a young Christian shows up for church, is simply not a sufficient amount of weight to tone a heart bloated with hundreds of hours of content from digital Babylon, secular digital world input. To summarize, the greatest challenge to the future of faith is the discipleship of our children. What is the future of faith in America? Is the church on its way out, at least in Western culture? And what about our kids who have opted out? When was the moment their feet stopped running to church in anticipation? When did they let go of our hands and stopped wanting us there? What moment in time marked their identification with other tribes? When did their joy of belonging fade? Will we realize too late that we gave them things that didn't travel into their adult lives as anything more than spiritual entertainment and moralistic stories, things lacking real spiritual power and proactive purpose? We have fierce competition for the souls of these kids. All around the world, children are being recruited for radical causes, the passions of a crooked and twisted generation. There is an intense battle for the heart of the child. Years ago, shortly after I became the CEO of Awana, two national Awana missionaries from Africa came to visit me. Do you know what the Muslims are doing in Africa? They asked me. They are building mosques and schools with oil money from the Middle East. Any child can get a free education. He or she just has to attend the mosque, and then they can attend school gratis. They are going after the same children we are ministering to. What poor parent, even Christian, can walk away from the offer of free education for their children? That is how they are recruiting for the future. They are starting very young, with small children. I am alarmed over this strategy that is working effectively, recruiting even Christian families to Islam. We need our own global child discipleship strategy. We can start by recognizing these challenges to the future of faith, challenges to the family, challenges to the church, and challenges brought on by an increasingly secular media discipleship. If these challenges are a problem for us today, imagine, if ignored, what enormous issues they will be in our kids' future. The year 2050 is closer than we think. We should hold our children close today, but we must do everything we can to anticipate and to prepare them to let go of our hands and step into their future as tomorrow's resilient disciples, fearless leaders of the church, and influencers of the culture. Today offers more than challenges. It offers opportunities. Opportunities to examine whether we are preparing today's kids to be resilient remnants, the resilient disciples of tomorrow's church. Will they have the kind of spiritual strength that engages a culture with elasticity and flexibility? Will they stand firm on biblical truth? Or will they break against the weight of culture? Will they be silenced and driven underground or blended into secular culture? Christians, but in name only. It is time for an awakening of faith in America. We believe a renewal can start in the children's wing of the church. It can begin in your heart as you read this book. Come together. There are mountains ahead of us. The church is struggling. Some say it is in decline or even dying. The family is breaking down. The screen is becoming a powerful disciple maker of our kids. Each of these mountains challenge the future of faith. But there is more. There is a threat beginning to show its face that is even more powerfully and passionately anti-Christian, and on the rise. It is an entire mountain range. Words from Scripture resound in my spirit now, even as I write the above foreboding words. and it is these. John 16:33, NIV 1984. I have told you these things, so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world. Essential questions. Will our children always run to church? What's the impact of a passive church in the midst of an active culture? Is there hope for the future of the church? And where do Christian families need to draw boundaries around a rising, highly impactful secular culture? Think about these questions.